Do you want to move from Scratch to Python? Well, let's start simple and use the knowledge and skills that you already have. And let's see how to learn Python from scratch. In this video, we'll highlight 10 areas you already understand from scratch and you need for programming. We'll show what is the same or similar from scratch to Python and the differences that you need to know. By the end of this video, you'll have seen a simple introduction that will give you the essential basics so you then have confidence to learn programming. Let's start off with the simple concepts that we've learned in Scratch that we can use in program. Number one, print. You can use a print statement in programming. In Scratch, we've already learned it by using say block. We start off with a simple print statement. So in Scratch, we had say hello for 2 seconds or just say hello. And in Python, we've got the word print. Then in brackets, we've got the word hello. And because it's a word, it's a string of letters, then we have these double quotes. You can use double quotes or you can use single quotes. You see the word print, brackets, and then we can press the green triangle and that will print the word hello. Now if we wanted to print a number, let's say number 2, you can see we don't need the double quotes. So let's run the program and you can see 2. So we can use more than one print statement. Remember the brackets, and you can see some tools that you use will help you with the bracketing. So let's have a quote and let's say hello. Double quote. So if you use single or double quotes, it's okay, but make sure they're the same. So we print that and we've got 2 and hello. So notice the 2 and the hello are different colors. So in Python, these are called types. Here's a number, which is an integer, and here is a word, so that's called a string. So you can see it's different, that we treat numbers and strings differently. So if we put the 2 in quotes, you can see it will change to a different color. So that's like a 2, such as in like a phone number. So you wouldn't do math with that. So that's print. One thing I would be very careful of, here we're going to copy and paste from the internet. And you can see that it's not the same color as the other hello. And also I've got a message here saying about an invalid character. So when I run this program, I'm going to get an error. Don't worry, errors are common and you make loads of errors, everyone does, but learning what to do once you have an error is a very important part in programming. So I know there's going to be an error, I also know why. But let's run it. Now we run the program and you can see it says invalid character in identifier. Now that doesn't really help us much, but it says a syntax error. So some character in here is wrong. Do you notice the double quotes? So if I change those double quotes, you can see that it changes color. So now try it, and now it works. So we've got 2, hello, and hello with an exclamation mark. So the problem was that character. So be careful When you copy something from somewhere else, such as the internet, you can get these very strange characters. And when you run the program, those strange characters can make your program not work. When you have an error, you get an error message and your program doesn't run. So that's the print statement. Number 2, variables. We've set variables and we've also changed variables in Scratch. Now let's look at variables. So we can create a variable. Let's create a variable x, and when we set x to 0, we can just say x equals 0. So x has the value 0. Now when we print x, remember print and brackets, we can just put x in the brackets. So when we run that, we've got 2 hello hello and 0. So we have the x equals 0. So that's our variable. So we can give variables different names, and we can also change the variable. So we can use our first operator. So we have plus, minus, divide and multiply, the same as in Scratch. So let's say x equals x plus 1. So in Scratch we had change x by 1, and here we have x equals x plus 1. So x was 0, but we're going to change that to plus 1. So that's x is going to equal 1. So we run that, you can see we have 2 hello hello 1. If we put a print statement in between the change of x, you can see we will have x equals 0 and x equals 1. So there's our variables. Now we said before there's a difference with a number and a word, an integer and a string. We also have another type of number, which is a float. So let's say 2.5. So if we run that, we can see we have 2.5, 3.5. So we could multiply by 2, for example. We use the asterisk, multiply by 2, and here we have 2.5 and 5. So there we've looked at the variables and the operator. Now again, let's have a look. We can see when I put quotes, single quotes around the x, it's changed colour. Now it's not a number. So this is like a string. So we have digits inside things like phone numbers that we don't do math with. But we can still sometimes do things with strings. So let's run that. So here we've got 2.5 and 2.5 twice. So don't worry about making mistakes. Just try different things. By trying things, then we can see what happens. So sometimes you might get an error message, but sometimes not. But it's good to try things out to learn what they do. So here we have print statement, we have variable, we have operators. We use simple operators in Scratch, and we can use them exactly the same in Python. So here we have x. We can make x equal 2. We'll print that and it will print 2. Now in these print statements with x, we add 2, minus 2, multiply by 2 and divide by 2. So when we run that, you can see we've got 2, 4, 0, 4 and 1.0. So it's changed that to a digit number, which is a floating point number, rather than an integer. So it has a decimal place, because when we use divide it can change it from a whole number to one with a fraction. So for example, if we said x equals 5, so we've got 5, 7, 3, 10 and 2.5. So we can use different numbers. Let's say minus 3. So here minus 3 plus 2 is minus 1, minus 2 is minus 5, multiply 2 is minus 6, and divide by 2 is minus 5. Now, there are a couple of other operators. Let's use these. 2 multiplied by signs, 2 stars. So what do you think that will do? And we can use the divide by. So let's use the number 9. So here we're going to run this. We've got 9, 11, 7, 18 and 4.5. Now we've got 81. So using the 2 asterisks means to the power of. So 9 multiplied by 9. And here we've got this percentage sign, which is modular. So here if we divide 9 by 2, we can get up to 8, and the remainder is 1. So let's imagine we had number 10 and we want to divide by 4, so we would get to 8, and then that would have a remainder of 2. So if we run that, you'll see 10 squared is 100, and 10 modular 4, what's the remainder? The remainder is 2. So those are our simple operators, and we've also got a couple of other operators that are handy to use. For example, if you want to see if a number is an odd number, you can use the percentage sign, and if it equals 1, it's an odd number, and if it's an even number, then that will equal 0. So 10 is an even number, we can see is 0. So those are quite straightforward. They're our operators. When we want to get something from the user, in Scratch we use ask and wait. Now in Python we can use something similar called input. So instead of using ask, we can use input. Now in Scratch the answer is then put into the block answer. So we can use the same in Python. We can use a variable. Now it doesn't have to be called answer, but we can call it answer, for example. So if we run that, what's your name? And I can put in Dr Codie, and then press return, and now it will print Dr Codie. Let's try it again. What's your name? Let's see. Let's enter number 2, and it prints number 2. So when we get something from the user, we can use input, and then we use a variable. So we could call that variable x, and let's enter a number. So we can run that. What's your number? Let's say 10, and then it will print 10. Now input is a bit strange in Python. We can use the word type to see what we've got in Python. So we're going to print, and we've got type x, and that tells us what x is. So here, let's imagine we can comment out. If we put a hash symbol, it makes a comment, and if we use it before some code, then it makes that code disappear to the computer, if you like. So here we've got x equals 5. Now let's print 5, and you can see here it prints 5, and it says int. It's int for an integer. If I put 5.5, it will say float for floating point, and if I put 5.5 in quotes to make it a string, so it's like digits in a phone number, for example. So here we've got string, so we've got integer, float and string. Now the reason why we've shown you that is because when we input something, when we get something from the user, what's your number? We're going to put a number in 2, which we think is an integer. but it's not, it's coming as a string. So let's try that again. It seems very strange, doesn't it? 2.5, 2.5, it's a string. So we want it to be a number. If we then try to do some math with that number, it's not going to work. So we can change the type. So if we're getting something from the user and we want a number, we want to change that, for example, to an integer. So let's make x equal an integer of x. So we can use this int and brackets to change a string to an integer. So now let's print x again. I know it seems a bit strange, but if you're getting something from a user and it's a number, then this will be very confusing. So better to understand it now. So we're going to run the program. Let's get a number 5. It prints 5 and then it prints 5 again, but this time the 5 is an integer, not a string. Yeah. So if we said x equals x minus 1, if we run that program, when we say what's your number and 5, we're going to get this error message because it's saying the minus can't be used on a string. Now if we move that, so after we've changed it to an integer, so now when we run the program, we're going to put in a number 5 and we're going to see the 5, and then we're going to minus 1 after we've changed it to a number, to an integer, and now it works. So that's something it's confusing, but remember, when you get something from a user, it's going to come in as a string. If you need it to be a number, then you can change it by using int then bracket. If you're not sure if the number is going to have a decimal point, you can use float. So let's just try that. So here we've got what's your number, 5.5. 5.5 minus 1 is 4.5, and you can see we've got float for floating point number. We use a forever loop in Scratch, but in Python there's no red dot to start a program. So imagine if we have the forever loop here, and then we're going to change x equals 0, and then we're going to move it up by 1. So we change x by 1. So we would imagine that we would print 0 and then print 1. And the forever loop would make the number go from 0, 1, 2, 3 and just keep looping. But there's no way to stop this. So in other programming languages, not Scratch, we need to make sure the loop finishes by itself. So imagine if we had forever loop, and we can do that while x is less than 10. Now, to change this into Python code, instead of using forever, we're going to use the word while. You can see that's changed to blue. So while loop x is less than 10, and I've created this colon. Notice as well I've moved the code over. So this knows that we've got the loop while x is less than 10, and it will add 1 to x and print it while this loop is happening. Let's make another print statement and tell us when it's ended. Now you can see this print statement begins at the beginning of the line, so it's not part of the while loop. So let's try that. So x is going to equal 0. We've got while, we don't need the word loop. So you can see here we've got while x is less than 10, it will loop. Remember the code has this gap, it's called an indentation, and then once it's all finished we're going to print end. So we run that and we've got print x, we've got print x is 0, and then inside our loop we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we've got end. If we accidentally put that print end inside the loop with the space, see what happens. And now we've got end after each number. So we didn't want that. So we want end to print when it's all finished. So here we have a for loop. Now imagine if we had a list of numbers. We'll look at lists soon. So we have a list of numbers and they equal, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we used a repeat loop in Scratch, and in Python instead of using repeat we have a for loop. So we can have for x in list of numbers. So here x is going to equal each number that's in this list. So let's delete that. So here we're going to have x. We can print x, and then we're going to print x plus 1 and print end when it's finished. So the for loop is not the same as the repeat loop. The repeat loop will keep going until we make sure it's finished. The for loop is a loop, but this will loop 5 times because there's 5 numbers. So let's run that. We see we have print x is 1, and then 2, 2, then 3, 3, then 4, 4, then 5, 5, then 6. So if we took out the plus and we just printed x, we just get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we could just have a word such as hello, and we could look through the letters in the word using this for loop. So here we've got for x in word, which is the variable which equals the string, the word hello, exclamation mark. So here we're going to print each letter in that word and then end when it's finished. You'll see here when we go through a for loop it prints everything on a new line. So we have uppercase H, E, L, L, O, exclamation mark, it prints everything, then end. It will even print spaces. So let's try hello world. We can see H, E, L, L, O, exclamation mark, space, uppercase W, O, R, L, D, and then end. So it prints everything exactly how we ask it to. So if we have uppercase letters, it will print uppercase letters. Same with lowercase letters, punctuation, and spaces. Part B, we're going to look at some more concepts that we've learned. If statements. We can use the if block, and inside the if block we have some code, and we run that code if the condition is true. So after the if word we have the condition. If it's true we do it, and if it's not we don't. We also learn if else block. Here we run the code if the condition is true in the if part, and if it's not true we run the code that's in the else part. And finally we also looked at a nested if statement. So it's an if statement inside another if statement. So moving from scratch, we've got a good idea what an if statement is. We have the word if, we have the condition. In Python we have a colon, and the code that would go inside the scratch block, we have this space, this indentation we saw with the for loop and the while loop we have with the if statement. So what's different? Well, it's straightforward as in Scratch, so we're just really looking at the syntax. So for example, if you don't use the colon, there'll be an error. So if we run this program, we can see it's going to print 7 because x is less than 10. If we had 17 and run it, it prints nothing. So that's very straightforward. So we can have less than, we can have greater than. So that's simple operators. So what's different? Well, when we give a value to a variable, we use equals. Now if we want to check to see if two things are the same, as in the condition in an if statement, we use two equal signs. So in this example, if we make x 10, we say the variable x has the value 10, and in the if statement we check, is x the same as 10? Equals means the same as. Now if we was to say not equals, we use the exclamation mark. So this means does not equal. So we have the opposite of equal. So here it will print x if it doesn't equal 10. So that's the syntax. So we can use other signs, operators in our if statement. So greater than or equals, or even less than or equals. So that's the condition in an if statement. Now what happens if we want to use an else? We use the word else. So very similar to Scratch, and here we can print something else. So exactly the same as Scratch. We've got the condition. If it's true, we print what's inside the block, or in this case which is indented. The else part is not indented, doesn't have the space, and then whatever code is indented underneath the else that has the space happens if the condition is not true. So you can see here it's printed else. So this is either a true or a false. Now what happens, for example, if we wanted to see if a number was positive, negative, or equals 0? So we want to know if a number is less than 0, we could print negative. Now what we can add here is an L if, which is a kind of mixture between an else and an if, and it looks a bit strange, but essentially it's the same as an if statement. So if x is greater than 0, don't forget to have the colon, otherwise it won't work. And now we can print positive. And then if you want to finish, you don't have to have the else part, but in this case we do. We're going to print 0. So this is the same if part we saw in the Scratch code. So if we run that 11, we're going to see it's positive because it's greater than 0. If we have minus 11, negative. And if we have 0, it's going to print 0. So always good to check your code. So finally, the only thing that we need to do here is, let's imagine we want to check to see if the number is over 10. We can say if x is greater than 10, and we can print over 10. Now let's put a number in that's over 10 and run that. Now you see here, let's go through it, it's not negative, it does match this else, so we're looking at the code that's indented here. So if x is greater than 10, well it is. Now we've seen that this spaces indentation means run this code. It's the same as if the code is in a block in Scratch. So it is over 10, so it prints over 10. Now the next line happens, it's not indented in the greater than 10, but print positive is still part of is x greater than 0, so that's true, so that happens. So because it's true inside an if statement, then it will run that code. So this is a nested if. So you can see here the space is very important to tell you what's going to run and when. So the code that's inside a Scratch block will run if the condition is true, or false if it's inside an else part. But with a nested if, it's exactly the same, but obviously it's nested inside another if. So we can see that the space is the same as the code in the block in Scratch. So that's the nested if. So you might want to practice a little bit with if statements, if, elif and else, and nested if to fully understand what happens. So if we were to move that positive, so let's run this with just 12. We can see over 10, let's say have 7. So 7 is positive, but it's not over 10. If we accidentally move that positive here, so this is a mistake, it's a logical mistake, the code will still run, but now it doesn't say positive, although 7 is positive. So be careful, just that difference makes your code wrong. But Python still runs the code because the code is correct, but it's not what you want. So the spacing is very important when you're doing if statements. Lists, often called arrays in languages, although in Python lists are called lists. So we start off with a simple list, the same as in Scratch. We just have a collection, in this case, of numbers, integers. So we can print that, and you can see it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if we want to print each member, each value in the list, let's say for I in my list, so we can use a for loop, and then we can print the value in the list on each line. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we could have different elements in the list. So here we've got numbers, integers, and a string. We could also have a floating point, for example. So that's fine. So that's the list, the same as in Scratch. Now what happens if we want to add something to a list? We can use the word append. So we have my list dot append, and let's add 6. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When we append, that means add on. We add it to the end of the list. Now, one thing that's very confusing in programming is the list, or arrays in other programming languages, starts at 0. So in Scratch we use the index. So if we looked at, let's comment that out and let's print my list at place 1. So we think that's going to print 1, but it doesn't, it prints 2. That's because the index, the place of the list, starts at 0. So we have my list 0 in square brackets is the index 0, and that gives us 1. So here, if we have 6 numbers, the last number is going to be 5 because we started at 0. So yes, very confusing. So let's imagine if we have a counter x equals 0. Let's print I. So the I is in my list. Let's print x and let's print my list with the position of x, and then we're going to add 1 to x every time you go around the loop. So let's have a look. So I, we know, is going to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. X is going to start at 0, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, we can take out the append. So we're going to print I, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to print X, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And my list X is going to print my list at the place 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's have a look. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've got X, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And at the position 0, we have 1. Position 1, we have 2. Position 2, we have 3. Position 3, 4, 5. So let's change that to perhaps 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 to see if that makes it clearer. So we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. We've got X, which is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because we've added 1 to X inside the for loop. And here at position 0, we've got 10, position 1, we've got 20, position 2, we've got 30, position 3, 40, and position 4 is 50. Now we can change the value. So for example, let's say my list 0, the first number, we're going to change to 15. So we've done that before the for loop. So now when we go through a for loop, you can see that the first element is now not 10 but 15. So a list, we can use any type of value, whichever type, integer, floating point, strings, can even have a list inside a list. We can add things by appending. We can change things by using the index, but be very careful. Something that people find difficult to get used to using. Instead of the index going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the index starts at 0. So it starts 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's lists the same as Scratch, but has this index starting at 0, which is very different. Now in programming and in Python, we have something called a boolean, which is essentially just true and false. So here we've got x equals true. So we've got an if statement saying if x, which basically means if x is true, then do the following. So the condition is just, does x exist, is it true? And it says I'm true. Now if we were to say x equals false, then there's nothing there. Because x is false, we don't run the code because the condition is not true. So rather than saying I'm not true, we would, if we want to see that, we would have an else part. So if we put in print not true, we can see not true. So this is true and false. This is a boolean. Now we've seen this in Scratch. If you can go far back to one of the videos, we used not when not touching. So here we have a list that we used previously, and we have if 10 in my list. So we can use this word in to see if a value is inside a list. So here 10 is inside the list, so it prints the list. So it's quite straightforward. Now in Scratch we used not. So, sorry, let's do that correctly. If 10 not in my list, print. It's not going to print there. So imagine if we had 60 or 70. If 70 not in my list, print list. So here we've got not in. Now others we can use, let's imagine we've got if 10 in my list and 20 in my list. So here we're using the word and. So this is not in Scratch we had the operators, we had or, and not. So here both this condition, 10 in my list condition and 20 in my list condition, both have to be true. So that prints it. Now if one of them's true and one of them's false, that means 30 is in the list. So let's try one that's not in the list. You can see it doesn't print it. So if you use and, then both conditions have to be true for it to print. Now what happens if we just want one of them to be true? We can use or. So if 10 is in the list or 60 is in the list, it will print it. So either one of the conditions is true, then it will print. So we had not, and or. So if you want to be a bit confusing, you could use all use not as well. So if 10 is in my list, so imagine if we had if 60 is in my list or 60 not in my list. So whatever happens here, if it's in the list or not, it will print. So in Scratch we had function with my block, where we defined a function and we called a function. In Python we use the letters DEF for define. Then we have the same function name, we give the function a name. The characters we use in Python, we have some brackets which are empty at the moment, followed by a colon. Then the same as if in a for loop and an if statement, we have that space, that indentation, and then we have our code. So if we want our code to be in the function, it has to be indented. Now we can call our function by just using the name and these brackets. So let's run this code. So we've got hello. Let's say hello 1 and hello 2. So we've got hello 1, hello 2 when we call it the first time, and again we call it the second time. So we can call our function as many times as we like. So that's the basic of a function, basic syntax. We have define DEF, we have a function name, brackets, colon, code with indentation. We call it by the function name and the brackets. So that's a function. Now what about these brackets? Well, imagine if we want to pass something. Do you remember in our code before we had something like x equals 2. Let's have something like name equals Dr Codie. So now we can pass name to our function. So now in our function, the brackets is where we receive something being sent to the function. So the same like we sent x in our Scratch code, we can send name. When we call a function, we put name in the brackets, and then when we define our function, something that we're going to receive we can put inside these brackets. It doesn't have to be the same variable name. So this name is in your normal code, whereas this n is just inside the code of the function. So variables are used inside the code where they're declared. So if I said in this code print n, then we're going to get an error message because n's not defined. Whereas if I say print n in the function, now we print the name because the n variable is inside this function and not anywhere else. So remember that when you declare a variable, when you use a variable, it only works in the code where you use it and not everywhere else. So here we've got n and we've got print n. So we've got name, passed it to the function, and when we run the code we print the name. So that's passing a variable. We can use integers as well. So let's have 2, and we have to change that to number. So here, run that again, you can see we can print 2. So this function we can use, we haven't said what n is, whatever you pass to the function will go into the variable n. So that's passing something to a function. Now let's imagine we want to do some maths or some type of something with the variable. So here we've got n, and now we want to return the value. So let's return n equals n times n. So now we've got passing number, so we're going to pass the number to the variable because it's in the brackets, but now we want to return that answer back to the code. So now we need to print number, now we see the answer 4. So whatever we pass to the function, we can see that number multiplied by itself. Finally, in Scratch we wrote an algorithm to find the lowest number and sort a list into order. Now if you're a beginner, this is starting to get in an area that starts to get a bit confusing. So this code is not really for you to learn, but more just to have a look to see how we can fit all the bits that you've seen so far together. So first of all we have a list, then we're going to call a function, and then we're going to print what's returned. And now we look at the function, we've got the function name, find min, we pass the list, and we're going to return the lowest number in that list. So we can start off by a variable called lowest, and we're going to make that equal the first element in the list, which is at the index 0. Now we use a for loop to go through all the numbers, and we check if each number, if the number is less than lowest, then we make the lowest equal that number. So to start off with, lowest is going to equal 12, then 5 is less than 12, so lowest will then become 5, and then the rest of the numbers, that won't happen because in our if statement the condition is not true. So here we have variables, if statements, for loop, functions, lists, and all of this solution, if you like, could be called an algorithm. So this is starting to get a bit complicated for a beginner, but let's run that and you can see the answer is 5. Now this video is really for beginner, so we don't want to make it too complicated, but if you wanted to sort this list, you could use what's called a built-in function, so therefore you wouldn't need to write the sorting algorithm. So you can use Python to do the complicated work for you, and you might, if you're a bit stuck, you might use the internet to find some code. So if you put in Python and then a description of your problem, you'll probably get something like Stack Overflow that will give you answers to your coding questions. So here we have the lowest, which is 5, and here's the numbers in order by just using the built-in function. So it's a simple way to run an algorithm. Well, by now, hopefully, you should know more about Python than you did at the beginning of the video. And you can see how you can use your Scratch knowledge to help you make that jump to Python. So congratulations on all that you've achieved so far, and good luck for the next step. So if you're interested in learning programming, then please subscribe to this channel, and if you click on the bell you'll be notified when a new video is released. So good luck with your future learning. And if this video helps, please like and continue learning with Dr. Codie.